We are both in a, I would say, revolution, but also in an evolution of how we do research in material science. And that is in the, let's say, 90s and early 2000s, we had this whole push for automation. That was largely invented and proliferated by Xiaodong Xiang and Ichiro Takeuchi. And then in the 2010 years, we had this Materials Genome Initiative. And for me, it's always very important, also for us Europeans, the second line there, that is for global competitiveness. This is actually a pamphlet written by the Office of Science from the President of the United States, who actually very early on, so in 2011, realized that having new materials and new and improved materials relatively fast has a strategic component to it that, let's say, in Europe so far has not been realized that much, even now almost 10 years later. Or more than 10 years later. But the idea there was that we actually try to do inverse design, so that we no longer just, try to change the parameters as like, okay, we do different thermal treatments or different compositions, but that we actually try to ask, okay, I have a functional property, I don't know, I want to have a cathode that stores a certain amount of lithium ions per, I don't know, a cubic meter or so. And then we actually ask, okay, some computer or some model, what do I need to do in terms of composition and processing in order to achieve that? Mostly the idea here was to this for steels. And in fact, within that framework of the MGI, so the Materials Genome Initiative, we did quite a lot of work back at Caltech. So this was at the JCAP, so the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis. And this is just one of the examples here where we were actually able to publish a couple of millions of experiments in order to try to answer this question, like, can we find new photoelectric catalysts for, in that case, green hydrogen production through this whole premise of the Materials Genome Initiative. And then in 2018, 2019, let's say that there was the idea of bringing these two concepts together, so automation and inverse design. And we've all seen it in the past 5-6 years. This whole push for machine learning was then actually carried over to the combinatorial material science or the Materials Genome Initiative kind of crowd. And then the idea was, okay, what if we take the automation idea, the inverse design idea, and we add to this the whole machine learning idea? What can we do then? And this integration of AI, automation, and inverse design came to this idea of the so-called materials acceleration platform. The way how I view this is, we are really progressing on this workflow complexity and integration line, but also we are trying to incorporate more and more materials intelligence, because let's say most of the robots 20, 25 years ago, it was a single laboratory instrument that was able to do certain things very, very fast, but they were typically not, let's say, that intelligent in the sense of, okay, we only measured Raman or measured the composition or synthesized materials very fast, but we didn't have this like very complex workflows and this very high materials intelligence where we can actually like couple a experiment with theory. In 2019, John Gregoire and we actually wrote a small review on this, and I think now the way how we did this is a little bit not a mistake, but could be improved upon. So the idea there is always this circle, yeah. So you have robotic synthesis, robotic testing, autonomous data interpretation, and then optimization, and then you go in this loop. And then some other groups, especially in Canada, they are then now saying, okay, we need to close the loop, or this is closed loop materials discovery. I think we need to go a little bit beyond that. And what we actually need to view this as, in my opinion, is more like a platform where we have modular things, and it's not super fixed in terms of your workflow design. So you need to be able in the future to actually have workflows that you can, have completely modular. And while you're doing something and you realize, okay, I need additional data, or I don't need a certain data that I'm usually taking, you need to be absolutely able to also just like kick out stuff out of your workflow so that your workflow, let's say, becomes a little bit more fluid in that sense. And then I actually think we're really in this paradigm shift of trying to maybe even one day answer this so-called Nobel Turing challenge. So to do a little bit of a preview over the rest of the talk. So what I'm going to show you is different research actions. This is anything that you do in the lab, like synthesis, characterization, and so on and so forth. And then really what all we are doing is we are deploying different accelerators on this. So an accelerator can be something as simple as automation, or something even more simple than automation, just parallelization. Instead of, putting one sample in a furnace, you can put 2 samples in a furnace. And if you do that, you just accelerated your research action by a factor of 2. Hey, great. You just did high throughput material science. The real clue comes in the fact when you have or when you chain up different research actions that are accelerated, and then you feed them back. For instance, if you do a characterization that is automated, and you feed that back to the synthesis, and you want to just optimize the composition of some alloy or so, you can be in this kind of research mode where you integrate them and you have this feedback cycle. However, it becomes very complicated if you need to work with a lot of research partners, especially if you need to work with research partners in different countries, or even working in entirely different domains. So it's typically quite easy or not very easy, but it's doable for different experimental groups to work together, because they can, let's say, they can talk through the exchange of samples. So I can work with somebody very easily that does a coating, because then I can just take that coating, put it in a battery, and make a battery out of this. But it's very hard sometimes to do these automated or even autonomous workflows together with people from theory, because sometimes you don't even speak the same language. And what happens if you had 4 partners in this workflow, and suddenly number 5 comes along and is like, hey, would you like to, I don't know, have my special kind of data service available to your workflow as well? And then typically the answer is, well, it's very interesting, but we have our fixed workflow and we can't integrate you that easily, because now you need to invent a couple of new interfaces. So this had been something that was really complicated before. I think we didn't solve it completely, but we went a large step towards it. Especially in the BigMap project, so that's the Battery Interface Genome Materials Acceleration Platform, where we actually have more than 40 partners. And if you have more than 40 partners, the integration of a new partner in an existing automated or autonomous research workflow becomes super important, super complex. But again, I think we solved it, and I will write a new paper about this as well. So again, I think we live on this materials intelligence and workflow automation complexity chart, and these 2 axes, they go, perpendicular to the application. So this is true for most applications, that you have this sort of divide. And again, I believe we are very good in the workflow automation complexity realm in high throughput material science. Manual experiments, well, they are not automated by definition, but we have very, very intelligent kind of experiments. And some of the early demonstrations, they really push towards, essentially the diagonal, because we want to go into this gray area. Yeah, this gray area would be where we have crazy workflow automation complexity and crazy high materials intelligence. I wouldn't even know what to call this, but I think we are pushing towards this more along the workflow automation complexity line than in the materials intelligence line, but whatever. And I'll show you 1 or maybe 2 examples on how we believe we are pushing along this frontier. Now, I don't think I need to explain to you why batteries and catalysts are super cool. This is just a chart that essentially shows you that there's this really push towards higher energy density or even higher energy capacity. There's also a question if watt hours by kilogram is really what we are after. I actually think it's more watt hours per liter, but whatever. But what we essentially need to do is we need to find new materials that ideally end up, here in the top on the, in the range of 500 watt hours per kilogram, but not, we simply don't have the time anymore from, 1990 to, 2030 or even 2025, because these 35 years will be just too long for the very short amount of time that we have, in which we actually need to proliferate and optimize some of the new battery chemistries like sodium-ion batteries, magnesium-ion batteries, or even calcium-ion batteries. So now the problem with optimizing batteries is that batteries are very, very complex, and a lot of things can go very wrong in a battery. And this is a nice graphic here from the Journal of Power Sources, where essentially you have it starts with your aluminum current collector that can have corrosion, all the way to dendrites that we all know, and then even the growth of the SEI. So modeling all of this is extremely hard. And then me as an experimentalist, I'm always like, okay, let's just do an experiment and see how the world really looks like. But even just designing experiments for one of these degradation mechanisms, or even building entire systems, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and so far at least has not really been done in a fully automated or even fully data integrated way. Then you also have the problem that I believe we are sometimes optimizing not for the right thing. And I try to visualize it like this, that if you just optimize for, let's say, the best cathode material, as in a high voltage cathode material, let's take NMC as an example, and then you slap onto that the best conducting electrolyte, the system will not be the best. So this is essentially this kind of side. If you really optimize all the functional properties jointly instead of individually, you will probably end up with very, very different optima. And integrating all of this is extremely hard. And I actually think we shouldn't, be talking about theory guiding experiments or experiments guiding theory. I think what we should have is research inspired by ideas. So now, enough high-level talk. Let's try to go a little bit deeper into what we're actually doing. So these are some of the basic research tasks, and this has been something that we have started at Caltech. So essentially, we were thinking of how can we integrate, and this is what these arrows mean. How can we integrate, planning with synthesis? How can we integrate synthesis with processing, and so on and so forth? My main job back then was actually to integrate everything with data management and the interpretation. Just that alone, took a lot of work. And then what we did at KIT, so you might know that my group just recently moved, or is still in the transition of moving from Ulm, so the Helmholtz Institute in Ulm, here to the Technical University of Munich. We actually won't take this machine with us, so it's still there. And what we did there is we took all the idea of taking all these different research tasks and actually building this up in a physical system. So we had combinatorial sputtering, we had cell manufacturing robots, scanning droplet cells, electrolyte formulation, high throughput Raman spectroscopy, and then the ambient pressure XPS. And then we wanted to integrate, and we actually succeeded, to put some of these, let's say, data-driven things like generative models or active and reinforced learning into the hardware and actually talk to the hardware. Now, what we do here at TUM, or what we are continuing here at TUM, is we want to do something called Finales. So I'll talk about this later. So this is the fast intention agnostic learning server. Essentially, this is you telling us what to do without necessarily having to know how we do it. This is important because, let's say you want a battery with a specific electrolyte because you just want to test something. Now, you don't want to know exactly how our battery manufacturing robots work. You just want that damn battery. and Finalis is the interface to do that. Now, somehow we need to tell our instruments what we want from them, and then we need to tell our instruments exactly what to do. This is a framework that we call HELAO. So this stands for the Hierarchical Experimental Laboratory Automation Orchestration Framework. And then eventually we have to tell you what we did, but also our machines need to tell us what they did. And for that we have a data management framework. And for political reasons back then, when we started this was Cutting for Mud. So we're actually running our own instance of that. So and then I'll mostly talk about the integration. So how do we integrate now with our machines? So we have this next level lab automation framework. Sorry. And the idea here is that we break down the programming of a laboratory instrument, and we are right now trying to program some of the new instruments, and this is always a big pain, but essentially what you want to go to is, once you have written those drivers, you want to try to have this so abstractified that the code that I'm showing here becomes a valid experiment. So this is a valid experiment that would run on our scanning droplet cell in this case. We just have a sequence of events such as pump, move, measure, and move. And then you have some parameters like how much do you actually pump, where do you want to move. But that programming a new kind of workflow or a new kind of instruments becomes as easy as, screwing the two things together. Of course, that's not the entire truth, because most of the time you spend actually in programming these drivers. We have another framework that can also work across laboratories and is fully asynchronous, but I might, if I have the time, I will just briefly talk about this next. So, okay, if we can talk to your machinery, to get the data to eventually do some actual machine learning on experimental data, you also need to make materials. And this is one example. So this is actually from the master thesis of Lea Nuss, who's now starting a PhD thesis with me. So the idea here is you do screen printing just like you do for t-shirt printing. Just instead of using, let's say, black color in this case, you're using a anode or a cathode material for a sodium-ion battery in this case. You can then, sort of 2.5D print these kind of electrodes, cut them out, and just as a reference, I am not, let's say, in the lab all day, every day, but I can still cut around 500 electrodes in a single morning. So, and that is something where I would say 500 electrodes per morning for somebody who's not always in the lab is quite okay. Now, given that you have an idea what you want to do, and let's say you just made 500 electrodes, you want to somehow put this into a battery, and this is our now relatively famous battery making robot that even made it into Tagesschau, so I'm quite proud of that. So if you want to read all about it, it has been published in Digital Discovery last year. So basic idea is you have all the individual parts on these orange trays. So here it's taking a anode case. Then you place this onto a assembly post, and essentially then you just need to stick all the different pieces onto it. Now this sounds easier than it's done, because you have these round pieces that you sometimes don't pick up perfectly, and maybe you've seen this here on the side with this webcam, that it just actually lights up really quick. The reason for this is we actually have to place all the parts very, very exactly, and this is also the reason why we're using extremely precise robots here. So here you see it again, takes the picture, it then actually fits a circle to the image, and then it like pushes the robot by a few micrometers left and right, so that you always center the electrodes on top of each other. Now, you can also see in the background there's a small pipetting robot that essentially can formulate from some stock solutions an electrolyte, and then actually dispense it onto the cell. And when you do this, you have a very automated setup. And Bojing, who mostly developed this robot, has done a fantastic job, because what we can then do is we can actually take a picture of all the electrodes, how we how we pick them up, and even how we place them. So then what you can do is, and this is a nice example, again from Leanus's master thesis, then you can spot very easily, okay, for instance, this cell that I'm showing here with the laser pointer, where there is actually some of the cathode material in this case that actually got off. So this is a very defect-rich cathode, and if you then build the cell with this cathode, so we don't do any quality control on, okay, there's a too high defect density, now don't build a cell, but I mean, we could. However, if you then actually have this kind of cathode in a battery, and you see then later, okay, the cycling data looks weird, you can then later go back, because for every battery that you put in the cycler, exactly, okay, it was this kind of a cathode. Here's the picture of why it might have gone bad. There's, of course, one thing of saying, okay, I'm planning this, and maybe you can see this like slightly purple ring here. You always need to control how well you actually then later place the electrode, because it could also be like, for instance, here, if something goes wrong, you actually always, you should be always able to track it back to the actual data point. Now, having an automated robot is one thing. Being able to take a lot of data is another thing. Actually, much more complex is keeping track of your analyses. And to this end, Fujan, one of my PhD students, actually wrote this modular data analysis package, so MADAP. It's an open source software. What we have implemented here are the most common electrochemical analysis techniques that we have in my group. And you can then actually chain this up. There's a little graphical user interface. We also have it as a Python interface, so you can it's even pip installable, so you can for instance, if you need to do an Arrhenius kind of analysis, you can just import it, do it, and what it actually there's even a YouTube video about this, and what you then actually get as an export, besides the figures, you also get a HDF5 file that you can upload, for instance, to the BigMap archive, and then actually have the data in a, let's say, fair compatible format, because now you now you can exactly say, okay, I analyzed this data that comes from, I don't know, the picture with that electrode, but you can also say I did it with this code version, and you have it in a very open and nice data file that you can actually share. Of course, you can now use these kind of setups to optimize essentially everything that you would want to optimize. And this is a paper that we did through BigMap with the colleagues at Forschungszentrum Jülich, so very close by to where you are. So they had a data set of, I think, around 80 data points. We tried to fit a very sophisticated machine learning model to this. So this was just polynomial regression. And then we wanted to find out which electrolyte formulations are actually the best in terms of conductivity. And this is what came out. So essentially, not a very good result. Then we, however, suggested 20 additional measurements. So they had 80, we suggested another 20. That would, make the model much better. So essentially a very basic uncertainty quantification. And this is then the result that comes out. So these all temperatures are actually individual models, yet still we are able to retain quite a good trend across the different temperatures. And these are really the globally best conducting electrolytes in this chemical system. Now, we can, of course, then transfer these electrolytes into our cells. And then there's always a question of, okay, how reproducible is actually your coin cell making robot? And this is an example. These are differential capacity plots. And what I want to emphasize here is this is not like milliamp hours or whatever scaled to over volts. This is amp over volts. This is the pure raw data taken from the battery cycler and then we just did the DQ/DV analysis from that. This is not normalized by anything. This is just simply taking the raw data, and we are this reproducible. And this is simply the cause of having very good cutting of electrodes, also having commercial type electrodes, actually putting them down and being extremely reproducible. This is roughly 64 cells. I think not all of them work. But if you're able to go to this kind of reproducibility without even having to weigh each and every individual electrode, I think this is quite crazy and also quite cool. We can also do like half cells. This is actually something that comes from catalysis. The idea is to take a scanning droplet, electrochemical setup is one of the very first examples that work. And for aqueous systems, these things work quite well. However, for non-aqueous systems, there are a lot of additional problems. And Alexei Sanin, one of my PhD students, did really fantastic work here in trying to find not only stable and usable reference electrodes for this special kind of setup, but then we also implemented in these automated and autonomous workflows even like quality control, that if there is a leakage, and this is for instance on cathode and anode materials in the battery, so we can like make small half cell battery experiments here, we can actually implement even quality control. We're actually extremely reproducible in the end. Again, if we do a certain data transformations, and if you're interested, the preprint is available on ChemArchive. Now we can do essentially some ex situ experiments for understanding the SEI growth. But one very quick thing that I want to just talk about in the remaining time is, can we scale our technology also to a gigafactory or a pilot line? Yes, we can. So here we actually did an example of identifying the kind of defects and the position of defects on electrodes. This is actually very simple detection of errors, but what is actually much more interesting, and this is actually something that we do together with you in Aachen, is we also need to translate data between different data sources, and we need to be able through different ontologies and essentially our middleware to be able to translate some of the insights. So let's say if you tend to see splatting on the right side, you maybe need to change the slit width by a few micrometers. But that's for that one system that's at PEM. How does that translate to the system at WBK? Well, if you follow our different tools that we have developed through the DataBud project, that would actually become a reality. So you can learn on one machine and translate it to another machine. I actually think we need to have much more benchmarks in these experimental kind of realms, because very often people claim that they have a cool method for discovery, where in fact they don't. And I would just invite you to read this small mini review that I wrote a while ago. One quick thing that I just want to say: for any of the optimization tasks, you should always think about something that we call the acceleration factor, so the reduction of necessary experiments in order to come to the same kind of metric. Or if you have a set of examples that you always need to do, you have the enhancement factor that essentially increases the probability of finding, let's say, a perfect parameter set. One of the examples where we actually use this, and then I'm going to come to the end, is pulse formation. This was also in one of our BMBF funded projects. So the idea here is that during formation, it typically takes a couple of hours. The standard formation is 20 hours. Some people say they use less, some people say they even use more. But our idea was, okay, can we reduce the time that is necessary for formation through pulse charging? Now you have a couple of parameters here. First of all, you have the on time, you have the off time, but also how high do you pulse the current. So the formation is just the last production step in order to actually grow the SEI. So this is quite nice. You have essentially three parameters over which you can optimize. And what we actually did in the master thesis of Leon Merker, who's now doing his PhD thesis with me, was we had we were able to have a degradation score. And we actually used that degradation score to put towards the formation process. And what we then said is, okay, we need a effective C rate that is anyway faster than the 20 hours, yeah. But also, ideally, we don't want to degrade too much. So we need to essentially have a parameter set from the upper points here. And then what we simply did is we tested this on 135 coin cells, did the machine learning, tested this again on a couple of coin cells, and then actually scaled this to 30 amp hour PHEV1 cells. Now, most of you will say, well, how does something scale from a coin cell to a big PHEV1 cell? The simple secret is this is anyway a slow process. So any thermal effects, if you're charging over 10 hours, are not that pronounced really. So this actually works. So this is the data that actually backs this up. So the PHEV1 reference that we formed in a little over 20 or a little below actually 24 hours. Took 24 hours roughly. And then with the pulse charging protocol, we were actually able to do the formation. You don't really see the up and down in the voltage because it's so small. But anyway, we were then actually able to reduce it by 50%. If you just crank up the current, you get lots and lots of lithium plating, and the cells are actually not that nice. Also in terms of cycle life. So here we actually have a process that makes a thinner SEI that, however, leads to a comparable and slightly better cycle performance at 1C than those that were actually formed with this like classical CCCV kind of procedure. And the cool thing is that this was then actually honored by the KIT Ideenpreis with the first place. So this is Bojing and Katharina holding up the prize. So Bojing is now moving here to TUM, and Katharina actually just moved to the University of the Bundeswehr here in München as well. So I don't have super much time. This is just the next thing that we are playing around with. So this is just trying to guess the difference. Here on the left, this is a classic constant current protocol. What I did here is instead of applying a constant current, I just applied a non-linear potential that would lead to a constant current. Now you can play around with this quite a lot. But what you can in the end do is you can do a nonlinear charging and let's say test the limits of some of the analysis techniques that you have in battery research. This is just a maybe a little bit unphysical, but at least fun exercise to do. And I would invite you to read the paper if you're interested in this. Just very quick, the last few minutes that I have, and I don't want to keep you from the Carl tour, is how can we actually reach towards integrated research workflows across a group. So again, instead of having to redefine, workflows between users in a third-party funded project all the time, you would just need to define this once to a broker. And whenever you have a new research project, you can then just say, okay, here's my open interface to the broker. To put this in a little bit different perspective, this is just from different research projects and proposals and papers. What I'm always asking myself is essentially, we have these arrows, I don't know, between let's say ontology and infrastructure, or between automation and some kind of project. The question for me is how to make all these arrows a reality. And So what does it mean to integrate planning and synthesis? If planning happens or synthesis happens in one lab and processing happens in another lab, how does that look like in data? And what we developed for this is the Finalis server. So this is the fast intention agnostic learning server. The idea here is that you always have a data infrastructure where none of the partners actually talk to each other, but you always talk through a brokering service. So if a simulation needs something, some kind of information, it posts this to the central server. And then if somebody says, oh, I have some kind of, I don't know, info in the database, is somebody asking for info from the database? You ask, is somebody asking from the database? Oh, yeah, somebody from the simulation side put something here, and then you do the database, and then you reply with a thing. Might sound cumbersome and complicated, but the reasoning behind this is then the simulation does not need to write an interface to the database. They just need to write an interface to Finalis. How we demonstrated this is by integrating a molecular dynamics workflow actually at 3DS that was able to, for instance, calculate the conductivity, but also the density and the viscosity, of course, with different error margins. And then what we had as an experiment is we had the same kind of formulations in a formulation robot. So this is the formulation robot in Ulm. And that was able to measure density and viscosity. The idea, or how we demonstrated this, is we actually integrated these two through our brokering approach. I don't want to bore you with the different data structures, but essentially everything is you send requests, these requests are being picked up, then worked on, and then they're being pushed back as measurements where you then can retrieve them from the central server. And this is now published in Meta. You can also do this a little bit different. This is a very recent paper. It actually has been accepted also in digital discovery now. This was mostly developed in Johnny Gregoire's group at Caltech. If you're interested in this, read the paper. The basic idea is that here you have not this completely ahierarchical workflow as in Finalis. Here you still have a hierarchical workflow where you have different orchestrators that are orchestrated through a central science manager. So to summarize, I think we kind of pushed to the left, at least, the workflow automation complexity and a little bit the materials intelligence, just because we're able to incorporate data from a very large and vast majority of sources. And the take-home message is, in order to essentially do machine learning for batteries, and not just to optimize singular materials, but to optimize entire systems, we need to accelerate our individual research tasks. We need to integrate them. And then we also need to modularize them in the sense of actually integrating experiments and theory. And if we do all of this together, then I think we can, accelerate battery science at the pace that it's necessary.